On June 12, 2009, during Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, the Pittsburgh Penguins held a 2-1 lead over the Detroit Red Wings late in the game. Looking to send things into overtime, future Hall of Fame defenseman Nicholas Lidstrom got the puck on his stick for one last shot attempt, but a 24-year-old Marc-Andre Fleury dove out and made one of the biggest saves in NHL history, and certainly one of the biggest saves in Penguins history, to secure the Penguins the 2009 Stanley Cup champions, and also secure me as a hockey fan. I was 9 years old when I watched that game, and it will forever be probably the most important hockey moment of my life. It secured me into becoming a hockey fan. So much so that I continued following the game, ended up playing the game, and as some of you know, ended up working in the NHL for a couple of years, covering the Vegas Golden Knights for 1 year in person, where I coincidentally once ran into Nicholas Lidstrom in the press box. That goaltender, Marc-Andre Fleury, who made this, I know this sounds cringy, but life-altering save for me and many others, has now retired from the National Hockey League. And I want to make a very thorough and probably long video going over his career, especially with the Pittsburgh Penguins, as I am a diehard Penguins fan, and thanking him for the wonderful career that he's had both on and off the ice. If you've clicked on this video, I'm sure you know who Marc-Andre Fleury is and how daunting of a task this is to go over his legendary hockey career. I was waiting to make this video until after the World Championships had concluded. Unfortunately for Fleury, they didn't even medal, they being Team Canada. But I want to take a deeper dive, not just go over stats and everything. I want to go over thoroughly what I can remember following Fleury's career and the 21 years of NHL hockey that he played. So there is only one way to do this, in my opinion, and that is to go in chronological order. I'm going to start before his NHL days, though, and I'm going to start in the QMJHL. I'm not going to go over his stats or anything. I'm not going to go over his stats for any of these years. I'm going to go over just major beat points and important things that I think are worth mentioning in Fleury's career. Now, Fleury was a highly touted goalie prospect. He played for Cape Breton in the QMJHL. They are now the Cape Breton Eagles. At the time, they were the Cape Breton Screamin' Eagles, and I remember always thinking that was very funny for a team mascot. Fleury also played for Team Canada at the 2003 and 2004 World Juniors. Unfortunately, despite having a very good team, Canada got silver in both of those years, and one of those was due to a very bad Fleury gaffe. Surely he will never do anything like that in the National Hockey League. In juniors, Fleury won the Mike Bossy Trophy for the most outstanding rookie of the class of 2003. He also won the best defensive player at the Telus Cup, which I believe is like a junior showcase for like the best prospects. But most importantly, he's a very top prospect for the upcoming 2003 NHL draft. Now, what many people forget, and I forgot this when I was researching this video, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, is that the Penguins technically traded to get Marc-Andre Fleury. In the 2003 draft, which is one of the best draft classes in NHL history, in my opinion, probably the best draft class in history, Florida Panthers actually owned the first overall pick, but the Penguins traded Michael Samuelsson, as well as the third overall pick and the 55th overall pick, to move up and get the first overall pick, which they used to draft Marc-Andre Fleury. And if you know anything about Penguins history in this time, the Penguins were bottoming out, and they eventually got to a point where they got Crosby and Malkin. But the first major piece of that core that ended up winning cups in 09 and then even further in 16 and 17 was Marc-Andre Fleury. And in the NHL, he came in pretty damn early, the earliest you could, at 18 years old. The Penguins brought him in, which is very risky, especially with a goaltender. He comes in, plays a few games, but then the next season, the lockout hits. Go check out my lockout video. During that time, he plays with the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, which is a no-brainer move to get him more development time to turn into a fully stable NHL goaltender. Coming out of the lockout, the Penguins, of course, saw the introductions of Jordan Staal, Chris Letang, and more importantly, Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, and the team, of course, started to get better. The team goes all the way to the Stanley Cup Final in 2007-2008. They unfortunately lose to the Detroit Red Wings, but Fleury was a monumental piece in making that Stanley Cup Final run. That offseason, general manager Ray Shero, go check out my Ray Shero video, rest in peace to him, gets Fleury to sign a 7-year extension, solidifying him and making him essentially the starting goaltender for this new core of Pittsburgh Penguins hockey. And it worked out pretty damn well because the next year the Penguins win the Stanley Cup in 2009. That save on Lidstrom. It was obviously a monumental piece that year. Doesn't win the Conn Smythe. Evgeny Malkin gets it. Makes sense though. So at this point in his career, Fleury's easily one of the top 10 goaltenders easily in the National Hockey League. Has a Stanley Cup and is still young and in his prime. So much so that he makes Team Canada, who had a pretty stacked goalie roster at the 2010 Olympics. That goalie trio was Marty Brodeur, Roberto Luongo, and Fleury. It's a lot different from what we have now with Jordan Bennington. Brodeur and Luongo being the other two goaltenders. Fleury doesn't play at the 2010 Olympics, but he does win gold with Team Canada. So a Stanley Cup in 2009 and a gold medal in 2010, both with Sidney Crosby. Then it starts to happen. This is a big part of why I wanted to make this video a lot different from like the hockey guys and just going over his career stats and things like that. I want to make this video from a Penguins fan perspective to go over this crucial point of time in Fleury's career from 2011 to 2015, essentially, where he really struggled in the Stanley Cup playoffs and even in the regular season to some bit. I remember the Penguins even brought in a sports psychiatrist to try and figure out what was going on in his mind. You think Jarry was bad in some of the playoffs? Fleury was bad. Now, Fleury had a Stanley Cup and got some more later. Jarry's nowhere near Fleury. But Fleury really struggled, in particularly in two playoff series that will be ingrained into my memory as a Penguins fan for the rest of my life, because they're two of the most frustrating series I'd ever watched. That being the 2012 first round matchup against the Philadelphia Flyers and the 2013 Eastern Conference Final against the Boston Bruins. Both of those years were rough. The 2012 series against the Flyers was just an absolute ruckus. Goals were scored left and right. Games had like 10 plus goals in them. Brizgalov was terrible for the Flyers, but somehow good enough to get them past the first round because Fleury was even worse. And after that year, the Penguins bring in Thomas Vokoun to try and be a mentor to Fleury and get him back. And yeah, the Penguins did not score. I believe they scored 2 goals in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Bruins. That was the year the Penguins went all in, and Ray Shero bought Jerome McGinley and Brendan Morrow at the deadline. But it was another frustrating year. And then in 2014 and 2015, the Penguins lose consecutive series to the New York Rangers, one in the first round and one in the second round. The second round series being a 3-1 series blown lead. So Fleury lived through a very agitating time in Pittsburgh Penguins history. A lot of changes were made. Ray Shero was fired. Jim Rutherford was brought in. Dan Bilesman was fired. Mike Johnson was brought in. And then Mike Sullivan was brought in. A lot of questions faced the Penguins in terms of what shakeups would be made. And one of the biggest questions was, would Marc-Andre Fleury stay or go? You could easily justify with the playoff series that Fleury had the past couple of years that the Penguins could need a change in goaltending. However, former goaltender and number 29 for the Pittsburgh Penguins, Jim Rutherford, signs Marc-Andre Fleury to a 4-year extension in 2014, basically saying, hey, Fleury is staying and we believe in him. Because obviously in 2016 and 2017, the Penguins win back-to-back Stanley Cups. However, Fleury had a different role in those Stanley Cup championships. Because during the 2015-16 season, Fleury was injured and rookie goaltender Matt Murray made his NHL debut and just kept winning. Went on a tear, and the Penguins rode the hot goaltender, so much so that they did it into the playoffs. Except for Game 1 when Murray couldn't go and Jeff Zatkoff came and was Mr. Game 1 in the win against the Rangers. Matt Murray took the Penguins all the way to the 2016 Stanley Cup. Fleury only started 1 game in those playoffs, and he also came in relief for 1 game, so he only played 2 games. However, he played in the regular season. He still technically obviously did play in the Stanley Cup playoffs, so he gets his name on the cup, but in a far limited role to what he did in 2009. Then another aspect of this comes into play because the NHL is expanding in 2017-18 with the Vegas Golden Knights coming into existence. After the 2017 season, the NHL will be holding an expansion draft where the Golden Knights will be allowed to pick and choose various players that were unprotected from NHL teams, and you're only allowed to protect one goaltender. Just due to a simple age factor, Fleury's getting into his 30s, Murray's coming up in his early 20s, and Murray replaced Fleury in the 2016 playoffs. It looks very much like the Penguins are going to expose Fleury in the expansion draft and the Golden Knights will select him. But there was still one more season to be played before that happened. In 2016-2017, the Penguins decide to keep Fleury, not trade him at the deadline or anything. I remember there being rumors of him going to Calgary. I remember thinking that they would let him start the Stadium Series game against the Flyers and then trade him at the deadline, which was a few days later. That didn't happen. And again, thankfully, the Pittsburgh Penguins kept him because Matt Murray then gets hurt in the run to the 2017 Stanley Cup playoff. Fleury takes his job back and has two phenomenal series, most notably against the Washington Capitals. That Game 7, he, in my opinion, was the best game of his career. That save on Ovechkin that he has with his stick, and then they cut to the cameras, and he's just smiling like a butcher's dog in his mask there, just having fun. Great stuff. However, the Penguins wanted to win, so when Fleury did have a couple of struggles, he had a short leash, given that it was the Stanley Cup playoffs. Murray does come back in the Ottawa series in the Eastern Conference Final, and he does play against the series against the Predators. So they essentially split that Stanley Cup playoffs. But do they really care? No, because the Penguins win the 2017 Stanley Cup. After that happened, after that game in Nashville, it was very clear that the Penguins were going to keep Murray and allow Fleury to go to Vegas. Fleury's last game with the Pittsburgh Penguins was him hoisting the Stanley Cup and, even more poetically, physically giving the Stanley Cup and passing it to Matt Murray. And that is exactly what happened. The Golden Knights took Fleury in the 2017 expansion draft, took him in as their face of their franchise to start out, and he became a very popular goaltender there. The Penguins went with Matt Murray. Not going to get into if they should have kept Fleury or whatever. Murray did have his struggles, and then we got Jarry, who also had his struggles, whatever. I will say, however, I do think Fleury going to Vegas kind of extended his career in a way. I think in an alternate universe, if Fleury were to stay with the Penguins, he might have retired many years earlier than what we got in our timeline. Because going to Vegas revitalized him so much so that he went to the Stanley Cup final again, 3 straight years, 2 with the Penguins, 1 with the Golden Knights. He loses to Ovechkin and the Capitals that year, but it's clear that Fleury is still a great goaltender. On February 6, 2018, I want to throw this in really quick, Fleury made his return to Pittsburgh. The Penguins won 5-4. Malkin scored against him. Crosby did end up scoring against his old buddy later. In 2020-2021, at the age of 36, Fleury is still kicking it, so much so that he wins both the Vezina and the Jennings Trophy that year as the top goaltender and the goaltending tandem, along with Robin Lehner. Also, this is a George Vezina card. I put it there to signify that he won the Vezina. I thought that was cute. The Golden Knights traded Fleury for cap space, I'll just say, to the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, Fleury doesn't stay long in Chicago, but he's still Fleury, so he still, draws crowds, has fun. Him playing alongside Patrick Kane is something I never thought I'd see, but it was a brief stop because at the deadline the next year, the Blackhawks traded him to the Minnesota Wild. Now, at this point in Fleury's career, the first year in Minnesota, he was kind of the starter. Cam Talbot was there too, and that was a thing. Former teammate of Fleury, Bill Guerin, was the general manager that brought him to Minnesota. But at this point in his career, he's looked at to kind of be a mentor to the up-and-coming former Pittsburgh Penguins draft pick, Philip Gustafsson. And rounding out his NHL career, Fleury becomes the backup to a blooming Gustafsson. The Wild are the Wild, so they never do anything in the playoffs, but it's a good send-off. And this past season, we all knew Fleury was going to retire because he announced it before the season. So pretty much every game was an important one, whether it was, this is the last game in Vegas, this is the last game at home, this is the last game against the Penguins. It was a farewell tour for Fleury, and it's what he deserves. Now, after the Wild lost to the Golden Knights in the Stanley Cup playoffs this year, he wasn't done. It was actually his first time he ever went to play for Team Canada at the World Championships. They lost. They were upset and didn't even get to the medal round. And despite any shocking announcements, I believe that is the end of Marc-Andre Fleury's career. I would love to see him sign a one-day contract with the Pittsburgh Penguins so that he can retire with them. A couple of more final thoughts before we get into the stats side of things. He never did get two important things that I know he wanted to get in the NHL, that is scoring a goal and getting into a goalie fight. I think he wanted the goal more, but he really didn't try for it as much as I thought he should. And then the goalie fight, he totally could have had it if it were not for the refs against Jordan Binnington that one time. I also expect the Pittsburgh Penguins, as soon as they can, give it a couple of years, but I do expect them to retire number 29. I'm going to be very angry if they don't do that, actually. I could see the Golden Knights doing it, but he will be eligible for the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2026. And then, yeah, just in general, Marc-Andre Fleury is the man. He was a fantastic human being. I unfortunately have never got to meet him. Not that he's dead. He's just done in the NHL. I hope I will be able to get to meet him. And then, yeah, his relationships with teammates. It's clear that him and Sidney Crosby do have a special bond. It's not like, oh, they're just kind of forced teammates or anything. No, they're good buddies. Him, Letang, and Crosby, they have the Canadian connection there from them being plane buddies and all the teams that they play on together. It's clear that those two are really special buddies. Him, of course, and Gino as well. And then real quick, to round out this video, let's list off some stats and achievements. Obviously, a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, all with the Penguins in 09, 16, and 17. He won the Vezina and Jennings Trophy in 2021. He silvered twice in the World Juniors in 03 and 04. He won the Olympic gold in 2010. In the QMJHL, he won the Mike Bossy Trophy in 2003. He was a 5-time NHL All-Star in 2011, 15, 18, 19, and 2020. His number 29 is retired in Cape Breton, and I expect it to be retired in Pittsburgh as well. In terms of all-time goaltender stats, he is second in goaltender games played. I believe he's only one of 3 goaltenders that have played over 1,000 games, and I believe he's also one of 3 goaltenders that have won over 500 games. He's second goaltender wins with 575 wins. First in both of those categories is obviously Brodeur. He also has played 60,666 minutes in the NHL, which is equivalent to over 42 days. With the Penguins, he is obviously first in goaltender games played, wins and losses, and multiple other categories as well, but those ones most importantly. And just in general, he is 9th all-time in games played for the Pittsburgh Penguins. He played 13 years. It really, we knew it was coming, but it's sad that he's gone. It's good though. Like he didn't have, other than scoring a goal, he didn't have anything in the National Hockey League that he needed to chase anymore. He had a great career, and I know he's a great dad and a great husband, so that's what he's going to focus on now. I don't expect him to be like a guy that keeps coming back. I could definitely see him as like a guest interview on some panel or something, but I don't expect him to go into management or anything. I don't see him going into coaching, being a goalie coach. I think he's just going to lay low for now. And that's what he deserves. I only took French in 8th grade, so the only word that I will speak in French is merci. Merci, Fleury. Thank you, flower.